you sure you love Jesus?
I'm sure I love Jesus.
And why do you love Jesus?
This is why I love Jesus, because he first loved me. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me.
Oh, friends, do you love Jesus?
Oh, yes, I love Jesus.
Are you sure you love Jesus?
I'm sure I love Jesus.
And why do you love Jesus?
This is why I love Jesus, because he first loved me. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me.
Oh,
Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me.
our next hymn is 195, Showers of Blessings.
There shall be showers of blessing. This is the promise of love. There shall be seasons refreshing, sent from the Savior above. Showers of blessing, showers of blessing we need. Mercy drops round us are falling, but for the showers we plead. There shall be showers of blessing, precious reviving again, over the hills and the valleys, sound of abundance of rain. Showers of blessings, showers of blessings we need. Mercy drops round us are falling, but for the showers we plead. There shall be showers of blessing, send them upon us, O Lord. Grant to us now a refreshing. Come and now honor thy word. Showers of blessings, showers of blessings we need. Mercy drops round us are falling, but for the showers we plead. There shall be showers of blessing, oh, that today they might fall. Now as to God we're confessing, now as on Jesus we call. Showers of blessing, showers of blessings we need. Mercy drops round us are falling, but for the showers we plead.
Amen. Thank you, our praise team, for the beautiful songs. And we are going to take a moment this afternoon to take an advantage of what one of our sister churches is doing. For those of you who are in our church forums, we did share with you a flyer of a program that is going on in Katy, SDA Church in Texas. And they are having a discussion that we felt we can take advantage of. As you will see, it's going to be on social justice and Adventism. There are a couple of our Seventh-day Adventist conference presidents who are coming together to discuss just that, social justice and Adventism. I would like to welcome you and pray with you as we go into this topic. If you have questions that they may not be able to address, feel free to come back to us on our forums, on our Facebook and on our YouTube. We will, in a later time, God willing, be able to try to answer those. Would you kindly pray with me as we head out to Texas? Shall we pray? Loving God, we thank you for the praise in music and in song. We thank you for your word which is spoken to us. Thank you that we can come together to share on sometimes difficult subjects like social justice in the current situation we find ourselves in. May your Spirit help us as we tap into what is going on in Texas. May it be a blessing to us. May it enrich us, give us a better scope of what we ought to do and what we ought to be as we continue to represent you here. Bless us to that end. May your will be done, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Now we will head south to Texas. Thank you.
The Texas
Yes, Pastor, pleasure to be here this afternoon and share with my esteemed colleagues in this discussion. I would say that it is very important for us as the people of God, as the Church of God of these last days of Earth's history, to not only discuss this matter, but be at the forefront of working toward what I would call bringing God's kingdom here on earth, which would involve definitely the struggle and the effort to bring social justice, to bring equality, to bring recognition to every single one of the individuals that are represented in our churches. I can't help but think back on the words of Jesus in Luke chapter 4, verses 18 and 19, where he was speaking about being anointed by the Holy Spirit. And he said, I feel that the Spirit of God is upon me and has anointed me. And you'll remember the things that he said that God had anointed him to do, which was to preach the gospel. And interestingly enough, he said, preach the gospel to the poor. He said to also to heal the wounds of the brokenhearted. He also mentioned bringing liberty to captives. And there's all kinds of captives in today's society. Captives of emotional stress, captives of intellectual stress, captives of racial bigotry and inequality. And so when we look at the words of Christ there in Luke chapter 14, I believe that we as a church, we need to follow in his steps and preach the gospel to all people, but also heal the wounds of the brokenhearted, set the captives free, and help the blind and the oppressed. And as we do that, I believe that God is going to bless the church in a very special way.
Thank you very much, Pastor. And you're bringing an important point that, of course, we need social justice to discuss this topic of social justice in our church. Elder Watkins, does that mean there has been injustices in the Seventh-day Adventist church? The reason we are discussing social justice implies there have been injustices. Do you think, how can you explain that? Elder Watkins, did you hear my question?
No, I didn't. You kind of muffled a little bit.
Okay, Elder Carlos talks about social justice in the Seventh-day Adventist church. Does it mean that there has been injustices in the Seventh-day Adventist church? And how can you describe it?
Yes. To be honest, yes, it definitely means it doesn't imply it. It actually happened. And someone said that history tells the truth all the time. There has been social injustice in the Adventist church from its very beginning. Even though our leaders, most of them, when the church started out, they were abolitionists. There were still those who did not feel that minorities, and especially those who were descendants of slaves, had any rights. The work started out very slow in the South because of the hatred. And there are many stories that can be told. There are many. Let's take one, Lucy Bayard. She was a black lady who suffered from a terrible disease, and she was rushed to one of our Adventist hospitals. And they, after they admitted her, they found out that she was a black lady, and they wouldn't allow her to stay at the hospital. And she had to go all the way across town to the Freedom Hospital, which is now Howard Hospital, where she could receive treatment. There have been times in our history that is not a pretty history, on some of our university campuses, where people of color could not be admitted. There have been instances where even in the General Conference, some of our leaders would go there. They couldn't go through the front door, couldn't eat in the cafeteria. They had to take the back elevator. So it goes on and on and on. There are many stories of the past. History shows that we have not always been a church that has been inclusive.
Thank you. And so you're really describing the historical background of injustices in the Seventh-day Adventist church. Dr. Honore, where do we go from here with all those injustices? They're still there as we speak. You guys as conference presidents, what needs to be done? How do we address these issues? And is there a solution anyway on what Elder Watkins is describing?
Well, the first step is always to acknowledge that there is a problem. If you cannot acknowledge a problem, you cannot address it. So when we talk about systemic racism and injustice as opposed to individual acts, you're saying that there are issues within your system that don't treat different populations equally. And if you look at America right now, you see that there are numerous instances where this is taking place. Depending on which zip code you live, it will affect how services are delivered to you. And in New York, we had a spike a few months ago in COVID. Now it's happening in Texas. And what you're discovering is that people of color are disproportionately affected. You look at income gaps. It takes Black Americans who do the same work will bring home 67 cents on every dollar that white Americans bring home. Why is it that we have 13% of the population as African Americans and 18% as Hispanics, and yet 55% of the prison population is composed of those populations? Is it because, as some people say, there's more criminality in those communities? No, it's the way that society interprets things. So from the perspective of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we have to recognize that there are odds stacked against certain groups of people. And the minute you can acknowledge that, then you can work
head. It's not just systematic racism. I think our whole church has to change in order for the work to grow like it should grow. The challenge is that 70% that a lot of conferences have to work with, God is blessing it. God is blessing it. But whereas a regional conference may have 5 states, a state conference may have 1 state. And we're not complaining because our job is to go to the whole world. But I think our organizational structure has not adjusted to the times. We're still running off of an 1800 model, and we're in the year 2000. And it affects all of us, not just regional conferences, it affects state conferences too. Some of the same problems that I face, Dr. Craig, he faces the same, Leon faces the same problem.
Yeah.
You know, it's the system and the organizational structure. And one thing you find about the Adventist church is it's a big ship that doesn't turn on a dime because it's a worldwide church. But now our people in both state and regional conferences are crying out, we need help. We need help. The structure, the financial structure of the church needs some adjustment.
Thank you, Elder Brown.
Yeah, let me add something to that discussion. And first of all, I want to say thank you for allowing us to be a part of this discussion. As a president of a state conference, we've got 4 states, Nevada, Utah, California, and I've got a church in Arizona. And we've got almost 220,000 square miles. And listen, we've got regions that are not as populated as probably Las Vegas. We've got Las Vegas and Salt Lake City. So we've got areas that are not as populated. The question you asked about tithe disparities, you know, the truth of it is in these smaller areas, there's not as much tithe in those areas. Yet we've got to determine that we need to invest to grow some of these regions. We've got, for example, a church on the reservation. We've got a church in Kayenta, and we had a church in Monument Valley. And these areas need to be supported just like a church in Las Vegas, just like a church in Salt Lake City. So we've got to find ways to be able to find the dollars to be able to go there. And I think these gentlemen are hitting something. It's not, I'm not sure if it's always, we can always say that it's racism as much as the structure needs to take a look at how we do stuff. And I think we haven't looked at it in such a long time that we really need to take a look at how we can do work in 2020 to advance the work and to finish the gospel so that God can go home, so we can go home.
Thank you, and I'll continue now. Elder Brown, I have another question for you, which relates to the state and regional conferences. What's your take on that? Do we need a structural change on what we call white and black conferences? What's your take on that?
You know, and Elder Honoré, I want to thank Dr. Honoré. I want to thank you for you know, recognizing the fact that we've come a long way. The truth of it is, and I got to be honest about this. I'm a president of a state conference, but I grew up in Northeastern. So Dr. Honoré, I'm from Rochester, so I grew up in Northeastern. I'm a product of Northeastern Conference. I went to Pine Forge with. So you know, I am a product. So what you see is the result of the regional work, and so. I recognize and understand both sides of the story. It's not just one part. There's 2 sides to this. The thing I would say is we had a courageous conversation last week. We have these week after week, and that same conversation, same question came up. Should we be having this discussion about disbanding regional conferences? Now, let me tell you something that's funny. In our area, in the West Coast, despite the fact that we have a state conference, departmentally, we have a regional director, we have a Hispanic director, and we have an Asian director. Why is that? Well, the important part to recognize is that we recognize that people who are native to those cultures help the work to grow faster in their connection. So that's what's we understand. That's what's important. And so we, you know, even if we said, well, we're going to disband regional work, we're still going to have to find a way to be able to reach these cultures. I've got all kinds of cultures and languages that I'm dealing with. You know, that's important. The question though is it significantly important in 2020 and beyond to have a structured regional conference? That's the question. And that's a debate I don't think we can solve right here. But what I say is the regional work has been effective. God has blessed it. And the church is going to have to take a look at. Now, here's why. Our young people, this is part of what our discussion came out last week. Our young people that are growing up in the church are looking at us as we are today. And they're wondering because they don't see culture and race in the same way we see culture and race. And when we are passed on and we've gone on the way, we're going to leave the church to them. The question is, what kind of church are we going to leave for them? And we've got to start thinking about ways to have, even if if we don't remove it, we've got to find a way to be able to make this church work so that all the work is working together as one, you know? So that's part of the beginning of the discussion. I could say more, but I'm going to stop because I got other people.
Yeah. Elder Brown, you said the question is, do we need certain regional conferences now? I want to submit to you, there was a recent research, a survey that was sent out, and 75.8% of Seventh-day Adventists, especially young people, believed that having white and black conferences painted a negative picture to outsiders. In other words, the church looked racist. So, Elder Carlos, what's your take on that? With that perspective, do you still think that it should stay the way it is, or there is a way out of this?
I wasn't sure who you were asking, Pastor. Who was it?
Yeah, it's Elder Carlos.
Okay. You know, this is an interesting dialogue. This is an interesting discussion. It's this question about whether we should have different conferences is almost like women's ordination. No matter what you say, you can get yourself in trouble. So I'm not going to venture too much into that. What I would like to say is this, that personally, I think I would take a little exception at the phrase white conference, black conference. I would take a little exception at that because
I agree that
this is in no way a white conference any longer. It might have been 40 years ago, but today it is not so. If you look at the numbers in the Texas conference, less than 50% are Anglo now. So I don't see how in the world we could call it a white conference. It's a multi-ethnic conference. It's a conference that's thriving. What I wanted to share here really quickly, because I know there's a lot more to discuss, is approximately 6 years ago here in the Texas conference, if anyone who knows anything about the history of the Texas conference knows that this conference has only had white officers throughout its history. And 6 years ago, there was a switch in the sense that, well, I'll go back 8 years ago, there was a switch in the sense that 2 of the officers were minority and only 1 white. But when Gary Brady left the Texas conference 6 years ago, I was concerned because I said, I've got to replace him with another Anglo. Otherwise, we're going to have serious issues here in the Texas conference. We got to have representation. So the person that was in line to become the conference secretary, Elton DeMorris, who's now at the Union, he's from Brazil. And I was very hesitant to put him in as conference secretary because I felt like the white brethren would really feel slighted in that. So I went to 10 Anglo leaders around the conference, 10 very strong, very powerful Anglo leaders. And to a person, I asked them how they would feel not to have 1 Anglo officer no longer in the Texas conference. And to a person, all 10 of them said, it doesn't matter what their ethnic background is, as long as they love the Lord and are willing to serve his people. And from that point forward, things really changed here in the Texas conference. So I think going back, I'd be a little bit hesitant to say white conference, black conference, because I believe in many conferences that dynamic no longer exists. And I just, to wrap this part of it up, I'm just thankful. I thank the Lord all the time for my brother Calvin Watkins, because our conferences are right next to each other and we're working together like hand in glove. That hasn't always been the case, but I praise God that that's the case now. We don't see a difference. He and I look at our conferences are basically one. We just, we work together, we consult each other, we're looking at doing projects together. That's the way it should be. And instead of talking about doing away with conferences, it's more about working together as conferences.
And Elder Carlos, you're bringing an important aspect, and I want to hear what Elder Watkins saying about this. The fact that we have state and regional conference, there is still a divide. There is still a division that is very obvious to church members, to everyone who's looking from the outside. So, Elder Watkins, do you think there needs to be a structural change? And if there needs to be a structural change, how would it look like? And the B of that question is, the way young people are looking at this is different from the way older folks are looking at this. The younger folks, when they look at the state and regional conference, they see division. They see a big divide right there. So how do we address it, Elder Watkins?
Well, first of all, let's deal with what Martin Luther King calls conscientious ignorance. That's when you don't know the facts. One of the greatest success stories of the Adventist Church in the North American division in the last 60 or 70 years has been the regional conferences. It is the greatest success story in the history of Adventism in North America. These few people came together as a result and a recommendation that came from the General Conference. All right? That's how regional conferences came into existence. A motion was made by the General Conference president. He said, let's allow them some self-determination, okay? Ministering to their people. The regional work has grown so fast. It has been so productive that a great majority of the growth of the North American division is a result of regional conferences. Not only when it comes to soul winning, but also when it comes to the financial support of this division. I would also say, along with my esteemed friend from the Texas conference, who I love Carlos Craig. There's no question. We are brothers. His skin is a little lighter than mine, but I love this guy. We don't consider ourselves just regional conferences, and that should not have a negative title. It only talks about the area we cover. We are full-fledged conferences, all right? We're no longer a Black conference. I have Hispanics. My wife is a Hispanic. We have people from Brazil, from the Philippines, from Africa. And so those who say, well, we need to do away with Black conferences, you may want to rethink that. And especially now, I challenge those who say, well, our young people are saying. Our young people more than ever are seeing the need for us to minister and to take care of our people. When you look around, when it came to what took place, with the policeman with his knee on the man's neck, the demonstrations, who's leading out in that? Who's speaking up for justice? We are. Our sister conferences are. And some of our state conferences are. So is there a need? Yes, there's a need. Ellen White talked about it in volume 9. And I could give you some, and I won't go to that, but I could really give you some illustrations of why what we do is needed and why it is such a success. If ever there was a time that we need to go into, in most of our cities, there is no state church. If you go to Atlanta, Georgia, okay, no state church. And I think also in New York, places like that. So there is a mission. There is a mission to our people, the sons of former slaves. But we are inclusive It's not a black conference. It's a multiracial conference.
If I could add to that, you keep referring, Dr. Kaba, to the survey where 75% of the young people say they see black and white conferences as something negative. Any pollster, any interviewer can manipulate a question to get a desired result. And if your question is it good to have black and white conferences, that sounds very crude. That sounds very raw. And the implication is that black conferences only accommodate black members and white conferences accommodate white members, and that is systemic segregation. So I think anybody in their right mind in the 21st century would find that abhorrent. And as my colleague, Dr. Craig and Elder Watkins have mentioned, that is not what we're dealing with. There's no church that has a sign on it that says whites only or blacks only. It's not a system of segregation. There's no church in my conference where anybody is limited by ethnicity. I think that I have visited churches in the Texas conference. I have been to churches in the Southwest conference. There's no such church. What you have now is something called freedom of association that does not equal segregation. Why do Latino people have Spanish churches? Is it because they don't like? No, it's because there's a missional approach to reach that segment of society. Regional conferences have been founded on the premises that we reach the urban centers of America where the large minority populations live. State conferences tend to be headquartered in rural areas, dealing with small outside places. They really have not impacted the major cities of America. That is a work that has been done mostly by the regional work. And then the other assumption, as I hear the discussion taking off, is that when are you, though it's not articulated in those words, if you break it down, the question always seems to be, when are you black brothers coming back? The truth is we never left. We have always been here. We've been part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church from its inception. And so the other promise is, in order to get past this, what has to happen, the regional conferences have to be dissolved and they have to come back and merge to us. But when you put that question in the setting in the state conference, why don't you all dissolve yourselves and come join the regional conferences? Minds go in completely separate directions there. So I think there's a lot of, we have to go a little deeper than the superficial talking about black and white. It is much more than that. In my conference, we have 10 languages spoken by 10 different language groups. We even have Caucasian members in several churches. So it's not a question of just black and white. But if you ask the question to young people, should they be black and white? Of course, I would hope more than 75% say, no, it can't be like that. But we need to deal with the deeper issues than something as superficial as that.
Yes, and this is the last question on this area. Going back to history, because there is a lot of history associated with state and regional conferences, and it's a privilege for me to have this conversation with conference presidents. There was the first move towards establishing what we are calling regional conference in 1909. They called it North American Negro Department, which was established to organize black work. In 1942, the name was changed to Colored Department. And in 1954, it was changed to Regional Department. So the formation of regional conferences was as a result of race or racial issues and stuff like that. And so, and this goes to Elder Brown. Do you think there's something into that, there's the history behind it, but also there's what we see today as we move forward? Hearing what you guys are saying is that we don't need structural change. I hope I'm getting it right. Is there something that needs to be done to refine and to make it clear on the issue of regional and state conferences? Elder Brown.
Thank you for, listen, one thing that I've noticed, and we all said the same thing, each one of our conferences And I don't think people really recognize what's going on in the church right now. If they did, structurally, you'll be able to see that whatever we're doing in Nevada, Utah, the same thing has happened all over the country. In all of our churches, every one of our churches, when I travel around Nevada, Utah, when I first got there, everybody says, well, you're walking into a Caucasian conference and this is going to be the way it is. As I began to travel the territory and began to look at each one of my churches, I started realizing that's not true. There may be churches that have a larger proportion of Caucasian members, but every church that I've been to, it's mixed. Just about every one of them. You may go out to the reservation, and on the reservation it's mostly natives. But even in our regional churches, we've got regional churches that are mixed. I've got one in Vegas that's got Haitians with French. It's got African Americans, and it's got cultures from all over the world. Paradise Church, the Mountain View Church, they're all in Las Vegas. They're all the same. And I think that the thing that we need to have, if you're going to have a conversation about just removing it, you need to really understand. I think Pastor Watkins hit it nail on the head. You've got to first understand before you start dismantling what is going on, because you might come up with a different model in terms of trying this instead of saying let's destroy it. So those are the kinds of conversations that needs to begin, but it has to be facts on the ground first before we start talking about dismantling.
Thank you very much. Let's transition to another topic. Elder Carlos, this is for you. Talking of social injustice, I've had a lot of stories. 2 months ago, I had a similar forum with pastors and black folks being bypassed on positions and stuff like that. And so that aspect of systemic racism and injustices, what can we do as a conference to deal with those issues? There are numerous examples from church administrators, pastors, and where people of color felt that, oh, I was overlooked, or I've been in this position for X number of years, but so and so just bypassed me. And there's numerous examples of that. So how do we move from that, Elder Carlos?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I would answer that beginning with a verse that I was reading this week, Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17. It says something that struck me. It says, learn to do good and justice and rebuke it. Bigotry and racism, discrimination in all its forms is a learned culture. Kids are not born racist. Kids are not born depressors. They are taught to be so. And I think one of the great challenges that the church has, that we have shrunk away from, that we have deliberately tried to get away from, is teaching children and young people learned behaviors of the kingdom of God. And we see in society today a lot of things that are wrong, but we also see some things that are right. Elder Watkins mentioned, you look at the demonstrations that are taking place. Who's at the forefront of that? That tells us that for all the bad that there is in society, there has been some good that has taken place because children and young people know what's right. And independent of what their parents or what their grandparents think, they're beginning to take a stand for what's right. And I'm personally very encouraged by that, by seeing this younger generation doing the right thing. The other thing I wanted to mention is, you mentioned as a church, what can we do to improve on this? I have nothing against demonstrations in the streets. I have nothing against manifestations, civil unrest to bring on change. I believe all that has its place, but I think if we talk about the church specifically, there's another angle that we have missed as a church. Sometimes, the gospel is so simple that we can't understand it. And Jesus said, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And Jesus said something right after that we overlook. He said, a city that's set on a hill cannot be hidden. And he's talking about the church. The church is supposed to be a city of light set on the hill that society cannot overlook. Yet, society is overlooking the church today. Why? Because the church is not as relevant as it should be in society. We have no influence over city halls. We have no influence over state capitals. We have no influence over police departments. That was part of our commission. Jesus said, you're supposed to be a city that's set on a hill that's so bright and so influential that people cannot overlook you. And I think, you know, the demonstrations are great. All that is great. But until we as a church become so influential that police departments, city halls, and state governments cannot overlook us, we're not doing exactly what God has asked us to do.
Thank you. And also, just a follow-up question, Elder Watkins, on this. And this goes back to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. In your words, do you think there's a divide between blacks and white? I don't want to put you on spot, but yeah.
I think there is a lack of understanding. I think the divide comes when you don't communicate. Okay, I think the more we talk, the more we find out we have in common. So I don't see a divide. I think there is a lack of communication. You know, one thing about Black people, we're open. You can talk to us, and we're forgiving people. And I will tell you, I came from Atlanta, the Southern Union. And what I have seen is a lack of understanding, getting to know people, not based on their color, but we have these pre-made up opinions of people based on their race. And I think that's where the divide is. If you sit down and talk to a person, how many Black people have gone into white people's home over the last 60 years? Most of them that have gone into their homes have gone there to clean. Most of Hispanics that have gone there to a white home is to clean. But let's reverse it. How many white folks have gone and sat down in a Black person's home? Okay? Once you sit down and you talk to people, you find out that people are people regardless of their race. They have the same needs, the same goals. They love their children. They love their church. But systematic ignorance on both parts. I have found that most people, Anglicans, don't know that there are Black conferences. So the people that you're talking to, a lot of them don't know. They only know what they've been exposed to. I've tried to change the narrative in our area where I say, don't call me a region. Well, we're Texas Conference, Oklahoma Conference, Texaco Conference, but when they come to Southwest region, the region. And Carlos, you've heard me say that. We're not a region, we are a conference. Okay?
Right.
Yeah, so listen, we're the second largest conference in this union. Refer to us as a conference. Don't isolate me and say you're a region. But get back to your question. I think the divide is more a lack of communication. The more I sit down, and when I came here, Carlos Craig befriended me. He pulled me in. He showed me he was welcome. We become good friends because the more we talk, the more we find out the Texas Conference and Southwest Region Conference, we're on the same page. Same goals, same mission. Matter of fact, our conversation helped us to partner on issues. He has some churches in places that are doing good, while I have some churches that are struggling in there. I can't even afford to send a pastor in there. So we are having conversations on how we can pull our resources together. It may be better for me to let him have that church in his conference since the work is already there. And he may have some places where we're doing well, where he's struggling and can't afford. I have some churches from people who are from Africa where I can't find a pastor who speaks their language. Or he may have a pastor that doesn't speak their language. And I have one that does. But I can't afford to give them a full salary because it's so small. So there are a lot of things that divide us, but there are a whole lot of things that we have in common, Pastor.
Yeah. I want to have a follow-up question on that, Elder Watkins, because you say the problem is not race, it's not the divide, but communication. But for 150 years, since this church has been in existence, there has been people who have gone through pain in this church, African Americans, people of color, discrimination, and all those kinds of things. So are you saying that the problem is just communication and there is no injustices? Is that what you're saying?
No, absolutely not. There is discrimination. There is racism. There is hatred. Okay? In our church today. There are people who look down. There are people who don't want to associate with certain kinds of people. I can tell you some churches can be all Caucasian. Let's bring 50 people of color in there and you'll see the church change like that. So no, don't misquote me or misunderstand me. There is racism in our church. For probably 70 years, regional conferences were paying money into the church retirement program at the North American Division, millions of dollars every year. But about only $500,000 was being spent on regional retirees. We found out that we were being discriminated against. We were paying all this money and we were only funding ministers and teachers. We found out that the organization was funding janitors and everything else. And we said, that's not fair. That's not fair. And so we established our own retirement program, and where our workers do 3 times better than state conferences when it comes to retirement. All those systematic racism components to the retirement program that were never being addressed, we were able to address them in a positive way. But yeah, racism exists. I started my comments out. It exists. And racism comes in all colors. You know that, don't you? Racism is a part of the heart. It's a problem of the heart. And until that heart gets right, we will have racism until Jesus comes.
You know, and Dr. Honore, on these, God has called us to share the gospel to all nations, all tribes, all tongues, and stuff like that. But like what Elder Watkins has said, racism is there in our church, in the Seventh-day Adventist church. And so my question to you is, how does healing, reconciliation, restoration, because we don't want on these, you guys as conference presidents, how does healing look like? How does forgiveness look like? How does reconciliation look like for what the church has gone through for the last 150 years, or even longer than that? And so how would you respond to that?
I would respond that healing has to take place on a personal level. Now, when you talk reconciliation, there may be an undercurrent or a premise that somehow we are at war, and I don't believe we are at war. I work well with fellow conference presidents from other states. We collaborate on joint projects. We sit in the same committees at the union level, at the division level. I enjoy going to a year-end meeting and seeing all my colleagues from across the country. So we're not in a state of war. There are individuals who may have been hurt in the past by individual acts, and those require individual healing. the church as an institution has also apologized. I think Dan Jackson, just a couple of months ago, issued a beautiful statement and apology to the minority members of the church who may have been afflicted by something that was done in the past. But the best way to bring healing and full integration and so forth into the church is to continue to have this type of conversation, have such subjects that we can talk about openly and deal with, and have all of us being intentional about not offending anyone else. And let me say that even within regional conferences, there have to be some conversations, because we've seen a dichotomy at times between African Americans and African immigrants from the Caribbean or immigrants from Africa. And even in the Caribbean community, it's not just Black American and African American. It can be Trinidadians and Jamaicans or Haitians and Grenadians, and it never stops. In the Hispanic community, Argentinians and Mexicans or Salvadorans and Guatemala, it's at every level. Our message has to be one that rises above any kind of class distinction, nationality distinction, and it takes hard work, because racism and classism are the result of sin, and we live in a sinful world. So all of us have to be intentional about respecting people and giving people credit for who they are. And that's the starting point for me. But I just want to reiterate that I don't feel I am at war. I don't think we're in a state of hatred, one organization against another. I see it now more as a missional approach. I believe that regional conferences are best suited to reach the masses of America's inner cities, the immigrant communities. And just like in the Bible, in the book of Acts, you have missional approach by ethnicity. It was decided that Peter would continue preaching to the large Jewish communities in the diaspora, while Paul, because of his education and background, would target the Greeks, those who were educated in the Greek philosophy and systems, and that's how the gospel spread to different generations. When you look at the explosion of Adventism outside of North America, it only happens when the missionaries go home and the work falls into the leadership falls to indigenous hands that know how to best relate to their people across Africa, across South America, and Asia, that you see this evangelistic explosion, where 20 years ago we had 4 million Adventists, now we're at 21 million. Why? Because when people are allowed to work with their people groups, they produce more results. And so in the regional conferences, you look at what happened in the state conferences and the regional conferences after 1945, when regional conferences were established, the Black work has grown 16-fold. The state work, the Anglo work has grown 4-fold. So had not regional conferences come into existence, we would probably be in that 4-fold mode. So when you look at what the Pew Research Center says, you have a church now in North America that is 38% Caucasian, about 32 or 33% Black, 15% Latino, 8% Asian. That speaks volume about the success we've had. That doesn't mean we don't have challenges, but the best way to address those challenges is for each of us to open our minds and be intentional about being inclusive with one another and respectful of one another.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Dr. Honore. Elder Brown, Dr. Honore said that, talked about a statement that Elder Dan Jackson, before he retired, he made a statement, apologized. And my question to you, and probably, I don't know if you have an answer for this, do you think at general conference level, there should be such a similar statement? There was one which was not as like the one Dan Jackson made. Do you think from the general conference, there should be such a statement that, somehow some people are wrong, and we are sorry about it, and it's time to work for healing and reconciliation and working together?
That's a loaded question. We sit in these meetings and we recognize what goes on. And I can't speak for the General Conference or for the president, Elder Wilson. But what I can tell you is that on a local level, we are really, really attempting to do is to make sure all the things that you're talking about are being done. You know, for example, at our conference, and I can only talk about what's going on at our level. The challenge for us has always been, how do you bring about reconciliation? You know, I think one of the pastors said something earlier about the fact that this organization is a huge organization. It takes a long time for things to change. And first, in order for change to take place, the leadership has to first recognize that there's a problem. If you recognize there's a problem, then you'll begin to work on it. And one of the things we've recognized is that in Nevada, Utah, for example, that because we are multicultural, because we are identified with so many different people groups, we wanted to make sure from the top level, like Pastor Carlos was saying, that at the top level, you have the kind of, you look like the rest of the conference. So for me, I'm the president, but I also have a Hispanic secretary, and I have a female Caucasian treasurer. And so when we meet together, we're sitting in the council to talk about things. We have all the perspectives in that circle. The next thing is we go in to make decisions on a local level. We want to make sure that we're listening intently, that we're identifying the problems, and we're listening to those problems. And I think that needs to happen at our level, but also needs to happen at the General Conference, North American Division. We thank God that, you know, that just recently the church voted Dr. Alex Bryant to be our North American Division president. And I think he's a good listener. I think he's gonna, he's gonna listen to some of the concerns. And I think that as they sit around the table with the General Conference, some of those concerns would also be addressed.
Thank you. And now this is a question to any one of you conference presidents in North America Division. So what are you planning to do at conference level to make things even better and conducive for ministry? As conference presidents, what's your take on that? What are you planning to do? Any one of you can respond to that.
What do you mean to make, explain that?
As conference president, we are talking about the issue of social justice, injustices that have happened. What's the way forward for you at conference level to make things better, even for your respective conferences?
Let me give you a quick example, and I'll start this one. We have COVID's changed everything for all of us. In one of our cities, we had to merge two schools. And the reason why is because financially, with COVID, if we had merged them, there would be a major financial problem. We'd probably have to let go of some teachers or something. But this would take the membership taking a look at this and being able to discuss this. Let me tell you why this was important. The schools were formed initially because there were some major racial concerns. You know, members would go to one church and then they would say, well, we don't have, you know, you can go to the other church. And so they formed their own schools that different churches were set up. And so now in order to bring them back together again, you have to begin to discuss the issues that created the fissure in the first place. And so one of the things we had to do was create a kind of something that happened in South Africa, like a reconciliation committee. We formed a committee. We got an expert to take a look at, to lead out in the committee and begin to have the difficult discussions. I think Pastor said it right. We're needing to have difficult discussions. We're needing to have those conversations where nobody wanted to have. So this person is going to walk this committee through this process to be able to ask the difficult questions, be able to solve those problems. And in the meantime, the school, both boards decided, the constituencies decided to bring the school together. So we're trying to move forward, but you can't move forward if you haven't solved the problems that caused the division in the first place. And I think that's part of what needs to happen right now. We want to move forward, but you can't just say, well, I'm just moving forward, and just because you heard or just because you were disrespected, I'll just forget it. No, that can't happen. We've got to be able to deal with those issues before we can move forward.
Any other person?
Well, I'll answer that question, but I do want to respond. You asked the question about do we think that there should be some kind of apology on the General Conference level? I think when you acknowledge that wrongs have been done, it gives some release. It opens up the floodgates. It gives people an opportunity to move on. And I think that's something that should be done. I think that an apology that comes from top, it softens. It takes a lot of pressure away. Just to say, yes, there were some wrongs that were done. We recognize that the church has not been perfect. And real Christians are able to apologize, you know.
Yep.
You forget about the political ramifications. You speak from your heart. And I think what I heard from Dan Jackson, I think our GC president is able to do that. I believe he has a good heart. I have to accept he has a good heart. But I think it would serve this church well to apologize. Yes, we didn't get things right. We didn't agree on certain issues, but we're still, moving in the same direction. I would like for that to happen. And your second question was, what do we plan to do going forward when it comes to social justice? Number one, I want to loose my young pastors and let them go. This generation, they see the injustices. They don't think like my generation. They're ready to act. They want to see some change. They want to speak up regardless of the consequences. I will guide them, but I feel that it's okay for them to speak up and speak out. And as a leader, I'm committed to speak up and speak out to injustices wherever I find them. If I find them in my conference that we're not treating Hispanics the right way, I'm the first one to speak up. If we're not treating Native Americans the wrong way, I'm the first to speak up. If we're not treating our sister conferences, state conferences, the right way, the buck stops with me. When Ellen White says the church can rise no higher than its leader. So all of the issues that we face in our church, it's not so much the members, it takes leaders to step up. You read the story of John F. Kennedy, Profiles of Courage. I think I got this from Dr. Honore. Profiles of Courage. They asked Kennedy, why is this book so small? When other presidents write books and they're 600 pages, 700 pages thick, and your book, John F. Kennedy, why is it so small? He said, well, my book is entitled Profiles in Courage. I could only find a few leaders who have the courage to stand up and to speak and to do the right thing regardless of the consequences. That's real leadership to me. That's real leadership to me. So my question, be a real leader. That's what I want to be, a real leader.
Thank you for explaining it that way by saying, if an apology would come from out there, just relieves a big burden that is there. That's a very important point. Elder Carlos, and this also goes to all conference presidents that are here in the panel today. There is a Black Lives versus All Lives Matter. And I must admit, your parishioners for all these conferences, all of our North America division, they're divided on that. So what's your take on All Lives Matter? Do you think Black Lives Matter?
Absolutely. Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, Brown Lives Matter, all lives matter. I think that what has brought the Black Lives Matter issue to the forefront is the horrible injustice that we all have witnessed of late. And I hesitate to say of late because this has always existed. This has always been. I think what happens now is that it's being captured live on camera in so many ways. And, this is a time for all of us as Christians to realize that we all need to be doing the right thing because anybody at any time can capture you on camera and put you on tape. But your question specifically, Black Lives Matter, I think that throughout history, there have been critical moments throughout history when groups of people have been oppressed in a very despicable way. I think about the ways the Jews were oppressed by the Nazi regime. I think about how the Native Americans were oppressed when colonialism took place and countries began to come to this country and displace them from their lands. I think about how the Japanese were persecuted in this country after Pearl Harbor. Innocent Japanese people in this country were beat up on the streets and raped and all that type of thing. And now the moment is that we see very clearly that the Black community is being discriminated against and has been discriminated against in a despicable way for so many years. And it's on us to make sure that this generation does not carry that forward. We got to put an end to that. And the church has a very specific mission in that, to teach our young people, to equip our pastors, to equip our young people, to equip our members, but also to impact the communities around us, to let them know that we stand for what's right and that we don't stand for things that are not right. So Black lives do matter in a very special way right now. We've got to get behind this movement. We have to do the right thing and make sure that we don't go down in history as the church that turned its eye and turned its look away from the moment that when we could have done something very critical.
That's very good. Dr. Honore, I see you want to say something.
Yes, I have absolutely no problem saying that Black Lives Matter. Saying Black Lives Matter does not in any way devalue other lives. But I think the greatest example, the greatest biblical example we can find to support the notion that Black Lives Matter is in Luke 15, where you have three distinct parables about lost things. You have a lost sheep. Jesus went after the lost sheep. All the other 99 sheep could have complained, saying all sheep matter. You have a lost coin. The other coins could have said, all coins matter. You have the lost prodigal son. And the elder brother came and said, well, all sons matter. That was his issue. But at different times, at different periods, there are different situations that require a response. At this particular time in history, with what we've seen in the last few months and the killing, indiscriminate killing of Black individuals in the hands of law enforcement, it is time to say that Black lives matter. And all lives will not matter until Black lives matter. There is a sense that right now it doesn't matter. So we're right to stand up and say that these lives do matter. Elder Brown, you had the killing in Las Vegas a couple of years ago, and you had this claim that Vegas strong and everybody rallying around Las Vegas. And that didn't mean that other cities in the country were not important.
That's right.
At that particular time, you were grieving the massacre that took place in Las Vegas. And at this particular time, we're grieving at Floyd George. We're grieving at Rayshard Brooks. We're grieving with Breonna Taylor. We're grieving with all these people who have senselessly been killed. There was no reason for Rayshard Brooks, after half an hour dialogue with police officers, to have seen that situation escalate for him to be dead. And that comes again from the over-policing of African-American communities, of minority communities. I still don't like being followed around in stores. As a young man, I was stopped and frisked twice by police officers without reason. And so these are personal things that affect all of us. And so to come together now and say that, yes, my people matter, Black Lives Matter is not a sin, and then that does in no way diminish the other ethnic populations. It's just at this particular time, this is where the focus and attention is needed.
Yeah. So
thank you. Yes, Elder Brown.
You know, I saw a ad, just a sign this week on CNN, and a young lady had the sign that says, "My life matters." And it just struck me because I thought about the fact that this whole discussion, I think some people have missed the whole discussion. And I've got two sons. I've got a 29-year-old and a 30-year-old, and their lives matter. And I happen to be Black. And what Pastor Honore was saying, Dr. Honore was saying, is that in just this moment, we're focusing, and because of all the things that have happened, we're focusing on African-American male and females because of the fact that so many deaths have taken place. And we're saying to the world that, yes, Black lives do matter. It does. We do matter. And when I think about it, I was going on a walk the other day, and I was thinking about how sad it is that a young man could walk down the street, Ahmaud Arbery could walk down the street, go for his jog, and never goes home. He never gets home because somebody killed him before he could get home. He was just going on a jog. His life mattered, my friends. His life really does matter. You know, and I spent a lot of, and what really makes me sad is I spent a lot of my time fighting for other cultures. I spent a lot of time fighting to make sure that our Native ministries are done in appropriate ways, that we fight for our Asian ministries to make sure that they're done well, that our Hispanic ministries, our regional ministries, all those ministries that are being done, we're fighting for cultures to make sure, in my conference, to make sure that we're doing all that we can to make sure that we protect and defend the rights of others. And if we're doing that, I think that somebody should be able to stand up and say, yes, Black lives do matter. My life matter. I shouldn't have to walk into a situation where my life is endangered because I'm Black. That's not right. That's not fair. And so I think that's the conversation we need to be having. As someone just said, if we're talking about lives, no one life is being protected. No one's going to be safe until all our lives are being protected and saved.
Good assessment. Yes, Elder Watkins.
Yes, I agree with all of my colleagues. In no uncertain terms, I endorse, I support Black Lives Matter. I will not allow others to attach it to any other movement to discredit it. This is a moment, as Dr. Honore said, in time where it needs to be said. When people say I understand, you really don't understand unless you walk in my shoes.
Yes, sir.
You really, and I appreciate that, I understand. But to get on an elevator and to stand next to a Caucasian lady and to have her take her purse and put it on the opposite side away from you. Now, she may not even be aware she's doing that, but I see it. I see it. To go to a store to be followed around, to have 3 grown sons, one in New York, a physician. When he goes out, I'm always nervous until he gets home.
Yep.
Because they're not going to ask him, well, are you a doctor?
Nope.
He's going to be considered guilty by color only.
Yep.
This is something that I've grown up with, that we've all grown up with.
Yep.
This is a moment. This is not just a Black moment. This is a moment for humanity.
Yep.
You look at what happened to our Native American brothers. There was a time when red lives they were not considered people. They've been discriminated against, stripped of their heritage, stripped of their land. Okay? There needed to be a movement that said red lives matter.
Yeah.
And Carlos mentioned the Asian population when they were put in concentration camps. You know, yes, all lives matter, but this is the moment right now. This is the moment, and we have, as a church, this generation is waiting and looking for us to step up to the plate. I was a young boy during the civil rights movement, Elder Honore, and I'm probably the oldest one on this panel. Carlos is probably 5 years older than me. but I right. Civil rights movement. I remember standing in my yard, a little boy. I wanted to get out and march, but my mother said, "You stay right on this porch. You're too little." I missed it. But I declare I will not miss any movement that steps up to the plate and support people of color, whether they be Black or white. Anybody that's poor. I mean, I got to speak up. And this generation behind us, when we went over into Warheads, Mexico, regional conferences, Elder Holloway went with me. And we took food, we took clothes, we risked our lives over there. And we saw all of these folks trying to come to America. We saw babies with sores. We saw a lady lying on the ground, just dying in the dirt. And we responded to that. When I put it out there and we played the video, we had so many young people saying, I've never been so proud of my church before. They're looking for us as leaders and our church as a whole to get involved in social issues. Some would say, well, no, just preach the gospel. But let me tell you something. Jesus was a social activist. He said, if you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. He fed the hungry. He clothed the naked. He spoke up and spoke out against injustice.
Thank you for all your perspectives on that. And this question goes to all of you, and one of you can respond to the. We are living in a very uncertain times, you know, with coronavirus and also with the issues of social justice. And so the question is, what are you doing as conference president to equip your pastors on how to deal with the issue of social justice? Because not every pastor is equipped. We actually have different opinions. So what are you doing as conference president to make sure we as pastors, I'm a pastor in Houston area, to be equipped to minister to my very diverse congregation on matters of social justice? Are there programs you plan to implement? Are there measures you need to take, or seminars? Because this is an important aspect, and we need to be very, very informed and versed as we minister to our congregation.
Well, we have been fighting for social justice since the beginning of our existence. So I will give you a few examples in our conference here in the Northeast. During the pandemic, our churches, our schools are closed, our office has been closed, but what has not closed is our community center and the food pantries around our conference, which continue to serve meals to hundreds of people. With the high rate of unemployment right now, we have discovered that many people who would not be in a food line are now in food lines. And so we have teamed up with our sister conference, the Greater New York Conference, and we have over 50 pantries serving food in New York. Just this past week, the North American Division Adventist Community Service worked with us to announce that we would be getting close to 30,000 pounds of food every month to distribute in New York between both conferences. And so we are providing services for the needy. We are concerned about the disparate effect, as I mentioned. This is again, a systemic racism showing its head. When you look at COVID statistics, Latinos and Blacks are overrepresented in infection and mortality. What is our contribution as a church? We have a health van that went around for the last 6 weeks with a grant from one of our local senators conducting free COVID testing for the community. And so every weekend we were at a different place. And then the city of New York called and said, we would like your van to go to the homeless shelters and do the testing there for us. So hundreds of people have been tested. Now I'm sure that's just a drop in the bucket, but this is an area where the church can be active. For 30 years, we've had an apartment building with 112 apartments for senior citizens. Next month, we will be opening our second tower. We obtained funding, $90 million from federal, state, and local agencies to build a second tower with 160 units. So that's going to put us at 270 units of housing, safe, clean, affordable housing for people in the community. And then we are preaching the gospel, because if Black lives matter, we want Black lives and Hispanic lives and white lives and all lives to have eternal life in Jesus Christ. And that's part of the gospel. But what we have known is that people don't care how much we know about our theology, about our prophetic interpretation of the little horn and the tribes and the toes and so forth, unless they know that we care about them. And that's the way Jesus was doing. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So we care for our communities, and we hope then to be able to follow up with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And let me share with you that by participating in social justice causes, I've been to at least 4 marches. In front of our conference office a month ago, we had over 1,000 young Adventist people who showed up. And that created a valve, a pressure release valve in our community, because our Adventist young people are being called by other segments to participate in things. But having an avenue within the Adventist Church where they can participate and live up to their morality within the context of their faith has been a major blessing. And a month ago, a few weeks after that, I was in Harlem giving my speech on the Sabbath afternoon that I know some people may find offensive, but dealing with social justice is a gospel issue. Jesus met the needs of people where they were. And I understand that until Jesus returns, there is going to be injustice on this earth. We can never completely heal the earth and get rid of injustice from the earth, but we must do our part as people of faith, as people of moral conviction, to address social ills when they arise. That's what I see Isaiah doing. That's what I see Amos doing. That's what I see the Old Testament prophets doing, and saying, cry out for those who have no voice. And so that is our responsibility as well.
That's practical ministry. That's the definition of practical ministry. And so we all could be involved in such projects and stuff like that. You mentioned, Dr. Honore, that you've been into several marches. And so my question to the rest of the conference presidents here is that we as pastors in the local churches, we may be divided on how we see the issues of social justice. Some pastors may believe we don't need to go out there and march with the rest. And that's why my previous question I was asking, if you as conference president, are you planning to have initiatives or programs to train pastors or even church administrators on the issues of social justice? I've had different opinions. Why is that particular pastor going to march with the rest of the people? At the same time, I've seen other churches very much involved on marches and being on the streets and on this issue of social justice. So, Elder Carlos, Elder Brown, Elder Watkins, what's your take on this? What's your way forward on this?
Okay, I didn't really quite understand the question. You broke up real bad there, and so I'm not clear.
Should we be involved in the protest as Seventh-day Adventists, and should the conferences have initiatives to train pastors on?
Yes, I think they should, and I think what we're doing is we are opening it up. You know, this social justice is really nothing new for some of our conferences. We have been involved with it since the 60s. You've had Adventist pastors, Elder E.E. Cleveland and Earl Moore, to march with Martin Luther King across the Pettus Bridge in Mississippi. When we had the March on Washington, Adventists were there in the mix. When you had the Million Men's March for Justice, I was there in the middle with the community service band. We passed out over 100,000 steps to Christ. So this is nothing new. It's just a continuation of the struggle. I marched in Forsyth, Georgia, with people spitting and throwing rocks at us for social justice. So I think your question was, what are we doing? Are we going to continue doing it? And the answer is yes. We did it by going to Juarez, Mexico, dealing with the immigrant issues there in Juarez, Mexico, and raising money. And the North American Division gave us a big grant to go over there. And we took about 30 pastors there, and they risked their lives. But and I hope I'm answering your question, because you kind of broke up when you were delivering it to me. But yes, we will continue to march, encourage our pastors, and prepare them for non-violent demonstrations and social justice events. Matter of fact, we want to participate ourselves, and we have participated.
Thank you.
It was an honor to visit the border with Elder Watkins a year ago. I think I saw it on my Facebook this week, a 1-year anniversary of our visit to El Paso, when we went to the shelters where children and families were being separated, and the relief we were able to leave there, and then going across the border to El Paso, where these same families now are being blocked and brought relief supplies. So it doesn't matter what, this is a Latino issue. And next year, maybe an Asian issue. Wherever it is, we're called to struggle for justice, to make an impact, to be the salt of the earth, to be the light of the world, to be the shining city on the hill. And we can only do that if we raise our voices at the right times. We must, as a church, be the conscience of society.
And Elder, we were going this year and had the plan, but COVID-19 hit and just stopped everything. But whenever it opens back up, we believe we will get more involvement. They need electrical outlets, we need electricians, we need physicians to go with us. This is a major project. But not only that, we don't even have to go across the border. We can just go to Oklahoma, where the Native Americans are living on reservations, and reach out. So we have a plan. It just got slowed down because of COVID-19.
Thank you. Elder Carlos and Elder Brown, as we are coming to a close, but I just want you to respond also specifically if on a conference level, you should have programs of enlightening, especially you pastors.
Yes, it's interesting that without knowing what was coming back in January, when we had our conference-wide pastors meeting, Pastor Cabo, you'll remember that we brought in a trainer to instruct our pastors for 6 hours about diversity and cultural awareness and dealing with differences between us. And I think it was, at least from the testimony of the pastors, they told me that this was one of the most powerful pastors meetings that we've had in many years. And I've heard from pastors coming out of that meeting in January how they have grown personally and how they have become aware of how to deal with cultural differences among us. Here in the Texas Conference, we're very diverse, as far as the pastoral team is, that's the membership. But I think that God was preparing us for what we were going to face here coming into 2020 by allowing us to have, and I want to give thanks to Elder Ken Dixon, our new Vice President for Communications, for putting that together, that cultural diversity training that has paid dividends already. You asked about marches. I just wanted to mention that I've had the privilege to go and march in Dallas here about 2 months ago. And but the one that really sticks out in my mind is back in the early 90s with the Rodney King incident in Los Angeles. I had a chance to march with 100,000 people going down to the municipal building down in downtown Los Angeles when that Rodney King incident took place. And until you have an opportunity to be in one of those marches and to experience what takes place within the march itself, it's really an enriching situation. And so we've had pastors call and ask me, can I go and participate in the march? And I say, by all means, if you're available, just don't be identified as Antifa as you march, and you'll be all right. So it's an experience that I think all Seventh-day Adventists should have, because as Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice anywhere. Yeah. So we need to be involved, and we need to get out there as much as we can.
Yeah. Elder Brown.
Yeah, finally, so let me just add this. It's when this thing started hitting and our members started feeling the pain of this, first thing I did was I got my pastors together and we started to have a conversation. Unlike Pastor Craig, I've got a very diverse group of pastors. And we began to have conversations about, what it is that we're feeling, what I was feeling personally, actually. And I began to share with them the impact. It's one thing, like Calvin said, it's one thing to actually watch us on TV, but the impact of being African-American and experiencing this was at a personal level. And we began to share and have those conversations. And so as we began to talk, the pastors themselves felt they needed to say something. So we created a video. We created that we could, all our pastors that wanted to be involved in that at a time could become involved in that conversation. And since then, we've been having what we called our youth director has been having these courageous conversations. And we've been having at least 2 right now, courageous conversations where we begin to talk about race, the impact of it, what it all means, and how we can get involved. Our pastors that are involved in marches, we're doing all of those kinds of things. But the thing is, we start at a different place. One of the things that you've got to realize is there are people, there are members who don't even believe that social justice exists. They're having issues with just saying the word social justice. We had a meeting we attended some time ago, and my executive secretary, we were talking, and it was just a Sabbath school lesson, and he brought up just the word social justice, and a lady came up to him afterwards and was like, well, why are you saying that? That's, it was like it was an anathema that he mentioned the word social justice. And so we've got a conversation that has to begin to take place in our churches, that people need to know that this church was founded on social justice. These are leaders that started the church. Our first president of the General Conference was a member of the Underground Railroad. It's one of his house was, and that's where the church started. And so for us to be down here now, and for people to even think that this is anathema, it's a strange thing. When we realize that the Adventist church started from a place that reached into suffrage movement, talked about alcoholism, all these other things, and the slavery movement, all these things were part of the development of this church. And so, yeah, we're doing those things, but it's going to take, our members have to be taught that these are important issues and that Christ expects us. Micah 6:8 talks about this. God expects us to do justice, love mercy, and do right by people. So that's what the expectation is that God has called his church to do. And that's what we're doing.
Thank you. And yes, Elder Watkins.
Yeah, I just want to say what Elder Brown said and reiterate. I talked about knowledge, wisdom. I think we need to, we have missed the education of our generation. And we need to re-educate them to the fact, whether it's good or bad, to understand that this. So I had a young person text me and said, what is our church doing? We never get involved with anything. We're always on the sideline. And I had to give her a history lesson right there. And I think that's what our universities need to concentrate on more. That's what our conferences need to do. That's what our division needs to do, to understand that we have been a church involved in it. Yeah, I mean, the Underground Railroad, some of our early leaders were the conductors of the railroad. In their home. I went to Pine Forge Academy, and right underneath the academy, in Town, Pennsylvania, there's a house called the Manor House. There are caves underneath there where the slaves hid out. So we have been involved in it. James White, it's the son, Ellen White's son, went down to Mississippi, stopped in Pittsburgh, his life on the line, preaching the gospel. That was a social justice he was demonstrating. He was the first one I know in the Adventist church that said, Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Put his life on the line.
Yes.
And White traveled to Huntsville, Alabama, and said, this is where we need a university to educate the children of former slaves. Ellen White, what was she saying? Black Lives Matter.
Well, thank you very much, Elder Watkins. My final question goes to you all. We at least now have Elder Alex Bryant as North America Division President. In your own words, what do you think should be his very, very fast agendas in regarding to these social issues? I'll start with Dr. Honore, Elder Craig, Elder Brown, and then Elder Watkins.
With regards to these issues, I believe his first agenda would be to keep the conversation going. He's been part of an administration that has been very open, very candid in their evaluation and in their conversations about race relations in the Adventist Church. That needs to continue happening. I also think, as Elder Watkins and Elder Brown were mentioning, we do need more education about our history. We as a people, going back to the Millerite movement, have always been involved, has always been a voice crying out for justice. Ellen White said, "You ought not to send escaped slaves back to their master." Even though this was the law of the land, she said, "This is one law which we must disobey."
Mm-hmm.
She's resisted segregation for years in the South. The book Southern Work, you could find a dozen or more quotes in there that would say Black Lives Matter. And so we must continue that dialogue. It's refreshing to see Elder Brown. He's not the first person of color to assume the position. Elder Bradford, our first president, was, and it's nice to see it come back after 20 years. And let me say that I'd like to see something like that happen at the General Conference as well, that after 160 years of existence as an organized church, there may come a time where we need to see more people of color at the highest levels of the church, and that will be an affirmation of our diversity. But these are steps that take time and have to be deliberate, and each of us as a leader has to be intentional about promoting strong human relations. I was born in a multicultural family with a Haitian father, a Dominican mother, so I'm Latino, Black, and West Indian, all at the same time. And I understand the necessity then to bring all cultures together to work, because our message is one, as I mentioned at the beginning, that addresses every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. And let's affirm each other as God's creation. We're wonderfully made.
Thank you. Elder Carlos.
Yeah, Elder Alex Bryant has been well equipped, well prepared for this responsibility that God has laid upon him. He is a person that has grown up in the administration of the church and has had an opportunity to partner with the former president, Elder Dan Jackson, and now assume those responsibilities. I feel like that he is well equipped and well positioned to lead this church forward at the division level. I believe he's going to bring a specific perspective to this that is needed at this moment. He will be able to initiate and bring forward some conversations from a perspective that only he can do. I do believe we got to be a little bit lenient, because we could fall into the temptation of expecting too much from him, being African American, and we need to stand with him and support him and aid him as much as we can as he endeavors to lead the church forward from here on. I would just one thing that I would point to that I'm looking forward to from his leadership. I believe Elder Bryant is a very structured person. Mm-hmm. And I believe that we are going to see in the coming years some specifically structured items which will help the ministry in general in this division. I'm going to say something that may bring some stones out of the hands of some, but I believe that the ministry, the pastoral team throughout North America, is a lot like the police force, in that the majority are good people, but there are some bad apples in the ministry. And I think that we all need to work toward getting the very best in our fields and getting people who love God and love all people into positions of ministry, and getting rid of those who are there to do harm to the work of the Lord. And I think Elder Bryant's leadership is going to help us with that.
Amen. Elder Brown.
Yeah, it's Elder Bryant is from I've known him since we've been at Oakwood, and he is an amazing person. And I'm just grateful to God that God has called him to this awesome responsibility. Being a conference president in a state conference gives me a unique challenge in that he has to be careful that he is always the president of everybody, that he is the president for the entire field. And that is the one thing that he's going to do, because that's the kind of person he is. However, I still think, and just to answer your question, I still think it's important for him to be able to bring education. There are a lot of people who do not understand, and this is the other part you got to realize. you can't expect people who don't understand to expect to and have grown up a certain way to get this all at once. And so it's going to take time for some people to understand exactly, and it's going to take time for us to explain that. My area, I know Carlos is probably going to do that, and all our presidents have to do that, to explain the work and what's going on, to explain the history, to be able to bring up people, you know, to the place where they can grow. And then once he can do that, I think he's going to do a good job of that. So it's important for us to not have undue expectations, but also to just to pray for him and just ask that as he goes in and as he guides the people, as he guides the field, as he educates us, and as Carlos just said, because he's very detailed. That's how he is. He's going to guide us to places where we have not been before. And I just thank God for him and Elder Jackson for the work they've done over the years in North American Division.
Thank you very much. Elder Watkins?
Yeah, I concur with the fine gentlemen from these other conferences. I think Alex Bryant is the man for this hour. I think we are in a crucial moment in the history, not only of the United States, but of our world. And I believe God has placed him in that position to take us to the next level. Your question was, what should his top priority be in North America? I would have to say evangelism.
Yep.
Evangelism. He has broad support, probably the highest percentage of any North American division president when he was voted in. This is an opportunity for North America to go to the next level. No longer are we're leading when it comes to money, but when it comes to soul winning,
yes,
we are at the bottom. It's embarrassing. It is time for us to recalibrate, to make the necessary adjustments, to make evangelism in North America the number one priority. There are people in our rural cities who need to hear the gospel, in our inner cities where the vast majority of the populations are. We have to develop a strategy to reach these people. So I think he loves evangelism, as Dan Jackson, but I do think that Elder Bryant will focus more on that part of North America, because growth is what the church is all about. How to measure the gospel, not by how many hospitals we build or how many church schools we build or how many roofs we put on churches or how many parking lots we pave for, but on how many people have an opportunity to hear the gospel and come to Jesus. And if he does that, and I believe he will,
yeah,
I'm expecting great things in the North American division, and we are behind them. I know all conference presidents.
Yeah.
We don't see Alex Bryant as a black president.
That's right.
Or a white president. He is the president of the North American division who God has put in office for such a time as this. And I would encourage all of us, all of those who are watching, let's rally around him. It's easy to criticize,
yeah,
but it's godly to support the man of God,
yeah,
doing God's work.
Right.
Thank you very much, Elder Watkins. Thank you very much to each one of you. It gives me hope to hear from the conference president, and that we need to continue having these conversations. There's hope for our church. There's hope for reconciliation. There's hope for forgiveness. And I think we are heading in the right direction. For those of you who have joined us or joined us halfway, today we had a Texas conference president, Pastor Carlos. We had the president of Southwest Regional Conference, Elder Calvin Watkins, and also we have the Northeastern Regional Conference president, Dr. Daniel Honore, and the Nevada-Utah Conference president, Elder Brown. Thank you very, very much for expressing yourselves and sharing with us on this issue of social justice. We'll continue this conversation. God bless you as you continue to minister here in North America Division. Thank you,
Pastor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor, for this dialogue. Thank you, brethren.
All right.
God bless.
God bless you.